Hi, Jessica. I think we might get started now. Pretty much 6 o'clock on the dot Eastern Standard, 5:30 Adelaide time. My name is Christina Panagopoulos from Craniofacial Australia, and I'm honoured to welcome you all today to today's webinar session where we'll be talking about speech and language stimulation in the first year. Um, if I could just take a moment to thank firstly PKF Foundation Adelaide, who kindly provided a grant to fund this program for the craniofacial and cleft affected community. And also thank you, Dr. Boyce, for partnering with us. On that note, I'll pass you over.
Great. Thank you so much, Christina. And I'm delighted to be here again this evening to talk to you about speech and language stimulation in the early as we're really focusing on that first 12 months. So as always, the chat box is open, so please do pop any questions or comments in there as I go through, and I'll get to those at the end. So what we're going to be talking about today is really around what you can do around to support your child's or your baby's communication before they have any surgery and immediately after in that first sort of 12 to 18 month period. And we're spending a whole session on this particular topic because there are lots and lots of things you can do before your child gets their first words. And setting up these really strong communication habits early on can have positive flow-on effects and set your child up really well as they continue to grow and develop more complex language. So I'm going to be focusing on communication, of course, speech and language, as you can see here. But some of the things I'm talking about today will also have flow-on effects to other areas of development, general connection and bonding. So it's a really great area to be thinking about early on. And the other thing is that so far in the first two sessions, we've been focusing on the challenges associated with cleft and feeding and cleft and broader communication. And it's really important that you have an understanding of those things and have realistic expectations of what might be happening and what might be coming. But at the same time, there's so much to celebrate as well when you're welcoming a new person into your family. So that's one thing I wanted to talk about today as well and share some ways that you can celebrate and enjoy your baby through communication and interaction. So let's get started. I'm going to start off with a very brief recap on speech and language and what we're talking about, what those two things mean. But if you need more of a detailed recap, go back and check the second webinar recording. So when we're thinking about early communication for babies, we're looking at two factors or two main areas or two main components of their communication. The first one is speech, and that's the sounds, the physical sounds that they're producing. Then the second one is language. So that's how they understand and use words, how they turn their ideas and needs and wants into words to express those desires. And early on, in this really early period, a lot of this learning happens through play. So it happens through general chit chat, books and songs, but really play is the key thing here. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is how we can think really intentionally about how we communicate and interact with our babies through play or through any interaction that we have. Because this is how they pick up their speech. This is how they pick up their language. And there are some simple things that we can think about and work into our daily routines that are going to be providing them with the rich input that we want. So why are we thinking about this so early? So I've already touched on a couple of things about how language and communication development starts long before first words come along. So we're thinking about things like smiling, turning to faces, cooing. All of these things are really early communication milestones. So we can harness that early development and curiosity and get in there just as our babies are starting to notice these things and interact. We also know, as I mentioned in the last session, that babies born with cleft can have slower vocabulary development, and they can use shorter sentences than babies who are born without clefts. So we want to get in there early to give them as much as we can, support them as much as we can early on, because we know this is something that can happen in this group. And it provides a really strong foundation for later development. And we know that particularly babies who have a cleft in the palate, their speech may be a little bit more challenging as they start to develop more words, but we need those words and we need that speech to be able to see how that palate's working. So we want to be supporting this language and speech early on as best we can. And I've touched on as well the flow-on effects to other areas of development and interaction. So forming this bond early on, promoting connection time through communication really helps with that relationship between the carers and a baby and that broader social development. So hopefully, in that brief summary, you think, okay, yep, we're going to get in there early. And I'm sure if you've been doing any reading or looking up in this area, you'll be reading lots about early intervention, early intervention. What actually is that? What can I do? So let's talk now about some things that you can implement really early on. So I'm going to talk about a few general communication strategies, but really we're going to hone in on what we want to be doing for our specific to this group where we have babies who are born with a cleft. Now, there are lots and lots of resources available online on general communication in the early years. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time going through all of those things, but there are two key ones that I really wanted to highlight to you today. And that's following your child's lead and getting face to face. So these two really key ones can enhance every single interaction you have with your child. So the first one, following your child's lead. So on the face of it, sounds pretty simple. I want to be doing something my child's doing. Okay. Actually implementing this is where it can get challenging, especially when there are lots of other things happening in the house, or if there are other things you have on your mind, or if you've got somewhere to go, which is fine. We don't have to do it all the time, but as much as we can do this, if we can do this more and more and more in all of our interactions, we're more likely to get that buy-in from our babies as well. So how do we know what they're telling us, especially when they're really little babies? We stop and we need to pause and wait and watch. Have a look at what they're looking at. Have a look at what they're touching. Initially, this might seem really boring and slow, but if we really pay attention to them and follow them, and then join in with what they're doing or add some language and speech, as I'll talk about shortly, in relation to something that they're doing, we're a lot more likely to have their attention and their concentration and focus. If they're not paying attention to us, they're not going to be taking in anything that we're saying. So I might be doing some beautiful language and speech modeling, practicing all the things that, giving them lots of models of all the sounds I want them to hear. But if they're not paying attention, you may as well not be saying it at all. So it's really, really key to be following our child's lead. The next one is getting face to face. And if you think about any interaction with any other person, you can appreciate the value of getting face to face. This is particularly important with our babies who are born with a cleft because we want to be encouraging sounds that they produce from the front of their mouth, which I'll give you some examples of in the next couple of slides as well. So if they can see your face, they can also see you making those sounds at the front of your mouth. They can see where you're putting your lips and tongue and teeth. And this can start from newborn. So as soon as your baby's born, you lift them up or you're lying them down and you're right over the top so they can see your face and they can see everything that's happening with your facial expressions. So many benefits to that beyond the couple things that I've mentioned already. So we're going to follow our child's lead. We're going to get face to face. Then what? What do we do next? What can you do? Talk, model, copy, repeat. So I'm trying to put a few key words here for you so that if you take anything, if you're holding anything in your mind, taking away from the session, you can keep these words in your mind. So our babies and our children learn to talk by listening to other people talking. So we need to do lots of it so they can hear it a lot. Another one that when I say it now probably sounds, oh yeah, of course that makes sense. But it's the doing it in everyday interactions that sometimes needs a little bit of extra steps in terms of thinking and processing. If you're at home on your own and it's just you and your baby, and it's pretty quiet, it might feel a bit strange or odd to be narrating everything that you're doing and talking nonstop because it feels like you're talking to yourself. But that's the kind of thing that we want to be doing. Talking, 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 modeling, 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 lots and lots and lots, while we have our child's attention and while we are getting face to face. Obviously, not all of these things are going to be possible all of the time. That's totally fine. If your baby's lying down on the mat and you need to be doing some cooking or cleaning up, you can still be talking and giving them that model that they can be listening to. So it feels like you're having a conversation with yourself almost. So if you're at the dinner table, if your child has started on solids, it might be something like they might be pointing to something or gesturing that makes you think they want more. You might say, "You want more? More, mummy. More pasta. More, please. Yummy pasta." So it's really like you're having a conversation with yourself, but how many words have we shown or modeled there? So that's the talking and the modeling bit. Copying is once your child starts to make sounds, copy what they're saying. But we do want to be mindful about which sounds we're copying and the types of sounds we are modeling. So we'll talk about that on the next slide. Copying what they say, even if it's not a real word, and initially I don't expect it to be a real word, shows them that what they're saying is relevant and really interesting, and they might do more of it. So they're playing around and exploring new sounds. I copy it, and they go, "Oh, what I said must be interesting. Let me try that again." So talk, model, copy, and doing that over and over and over again. So I'm going to go through now some specific things that you can do, some specific sounds to focus on, and some specific games and activities that you might like to do. But I'd really like you to think about how you can implement some of these things as I'm going through into your daily routines. In order for them to be successful, we want them to be part of things that you're already doing. If you have to add another thing to your daily routines, putting aside an extra 5-10 minutes, it's less likely to happen and it's not going to have as big an effect or impact on your baby's communication development. We want it to be happening every time we're talking in every possible interaction. So think about what you already do and how you might be able to implement some of these things into what you're already doing. And then you might pop a post-it up somewhere near where this particular routine that you have every day just to remind you about something that you feel might be helpful or work for you. So even though our babies don't necessarily understand what we're saying just yet, they're listening to your intonation, they're listening to the sounds that you're saying, they're listening to when you're pausing, they're noticing your eye contact, and they're really feeling that connection. So the impact is beyond just what we're saying or just that thing we need to get done. So what exactly can we do? We've followed our child's lead, we've got face to face, we're doing lots of talking, modeling, and copying, but what do I actually want to be doing there? What types of sounds do I want to be emphasizing and focusing on. So our goal is sound play and exploration in these early years. With our babies who have clefts, we want to be encouraging our oral sounds. So if you need a refresher on that, go back to the second session. I talked a little bit about that in more detail. So when I say oral sounds, I mean any sounds that are coming out of the mouth. So that's any sounds apart from our three nasal sounds, and ng. Those are the sounds that come out my nose. So if you try and say those sounds and close your nose, the sounds disappear. So I want to focus on sounds that come out of my mouth. And I've got some examples on the slide there. So p, t, s, b, sh. These are sounds that come out of my mouth and also are sounds that are produced at the front of my mouth. So these are the sounds I want to be encouraging. Peekaboo is a great one. If you hear any sounds that are nasal, so those sounds coming out of the nose, or throat sounds like oh, those kinds of sounds, those are the ones we don't want to acknowledge as much and ignore them. It's fine if they're saying them, but those are the ones we don't want to be repeating back. And those are the ones we don't want to be overtly modeling. We want to try and find an alternative word that has these oral sounds instead of those the throat sounds or the nasal sounds. And the reason for that is that toddlers and children who have a cleft often use those nasal or throat sounds to compensate for what's happening. And they might use those sounds to replace a lot of the other oral sounds, even if they may be able to say them. So we want to try and just discourage those where we can. In this, we're doing lots of lip and tongue play, copying sounds and games. I've already talked a little bit about copying. And then we want to be praising and reinforcing any attempts at communication. So this is where you can really just soak it all up and acknowledge any attempts at communication. How you might do that, you might react really excitedly, you might repeat it back in a really excited voice. Even if they say a nasal sound or they go, oh, you might say, yeah, oh dear. So you're acknowledging their production, but you're providing them that model of the oral sound of what you would like them to try and say instead of saying, oh, for example. Okay. Some specific games and things that you might do. Peekaboo, I mentioned. Peekaboo is a great one for many different reasons. But when we're thinking about speech and language in cleft, it's got the sounds that we want to be encouraging, and it's a fun game and shows that interaction. You have lots of that looking as well between the two people who are playing peekaboo. Any animal sounds, but thinking about the animal sounds that come from the front of your mouth. Ba, ba, snake, buzzy bee. Shh, a good one. Blowing bubbles, blowing raspberries, mirror play. So looking in the mirror, looking at the lips, making funny shapes with your lips and your tongue, playing around with your tongue, wobbling your tongue from side to side. All of these kinds of things are going to be absolutely wonderful for our babies early on. Music. Music is a great one because of the repetition. Repetition, repetition, repetition. So, and because music is, it's engaging and it's fun. The songs that I have listed here are some songs that have a really great inventory of those front oral sounds that I'm talking about that I want to be modeling lots of. So these are just some examples of songs that you might like to start off with if you're just not sure where to go. And these are great ones because you can sing them, you can play them if you just need a bit of quiet time. You can leave them with one of these songs and they can listen to it on their own as well. The brushing teeth song is one I added on there just to show you that you don't have to just use songs that already exist. You can make up your own songs. So in my house, we have a brushing teeth song that we sing when we brush our teeth. And it's We brush our teeth twice a day. So I know that we're going to be singing this song 2 times a day, and you can make up the song. Um, it can be in any language. So we speak a few different languages at home. So we have our song in a few different languages. You can pick words that you want your child to be learning and focusing on, words that have those sounds at the front of the mouth. And you sing it when you're brushing your teeth. And then you know you've ticked that off. You've done this, if you haven't done anything else that day, or if you don't feel like it's been a big day, you've done your brushing teeth song and you've given them that language model. And then the last thing is books. Obviously, there are so many reasons we want to be reading to our babies. But if I'm looking at this from a communication lens for babies with a cleft, we can support that interaction. We have that structure, and we can pick books that are going to give us a lot of these nice models of the sounds we want to be focusing on. On the slide here are a couple of those really great ones. So Peekaboo Sun, there's a whole series of these Peekaboo books. They're wonderful. The babies and toddlers love them because every page has something they can manipulate. It's got a slider or something they could spin around. And Peekaboo is on every single page. Perfect. The River is another beautiful one. Any book in the Spot series. What we're looking for is repetition, so phrases that are repeated, and we're looking for lots of those anterior or front oral sounds. Again, it's the same kind of thing in a different format. And with sharing books with our babies, we're providing them that speech model, but we're also teaching them how books work. We're teaching them about turning pages, how we hold a book, how we read a book. It's the start of their literacy development already. Adding books into our routine starts to build up that interest and enjoyment in books from really, really early on. So this is what I mentioned before. So we're looking at those repeated sounds or phrases with oral sounds in there. A reason why that Peekaboo one is great because it's a really simple book as well. So it's all about setting up a routine for our babies to hear and be doing the same thing over and over and over again. So because of that, it's going to be quite repetitive. So we really want you to try and be patient and consistent. You might have read the Peekaboo book 50 times in the last week, or you've sung the same song 50 times in the last week, and you're not really seeing anything change in your baby. But then a couple weeks later, suddenly they're saying, or at least trying to say peekaboo. And that the reason for that will be because you have given them all that repetition. It takes time. And might feel like you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, but that's exactly what our babies need. And if there is something from a structural standpoint that is making it a bit harder for your babies to say those sounds at the front, even if they're not able to say it, hearing you say it is still going to be beneficial. And trying to say it, putting their lips in the right place, putting their tongue in the right place, even if the sound doesn't come out exactly how your sound is still beneficial and really helpful for their speech and language development on their ongoing journey. And really do celebrate and acknowledge the little wins along the way and enjoy your baby through all these beautiful interactions that you'll be having together. Okay, where to from here? So I did just want to flag a few things for you to keep in the back of your mind because this early period is where we're really interested in seeing how communication is developing. And as our babies start to develop more speech and language, that's when we start to be able to say or make calls around what's happening with their communication development and whether or not they might need any extra support. So this slide has a few things on it that might be things to look out for, not super early on because we need to give our babies time to develop. But by 18 to 24 months, if you're noticing any of these things, it might be a good time to start thinking about going to see a speech pathologist. And you in the community, and you will be linked in obviously with your tertiary centers, but you might be at a point where you're able to get a little bit more focused therapy as well. But keeping in mind that a lot of private clinics do have wait lists. So if you feel like some of these things might be a concern or things that you're noticing for your baby, you can always get on lists earlier. And then you don't have to take appointments when they're available if you don't need them anymore. So what are the things to look out for? So the first one is if they have air or sound coming through their nose when they're trying to say these sounds that I expect to be coming out through their mouth. It's not unexpected with our babies and children who are born with a cleft. The second one is if they have limited sounds. So again, this is by 18 or 24 months. For example, if they only have those nasal sounds, the and sounds. The next one's if they're using unexpected sounds. So if all they're saying is that glottal sound coming from their throat is taking over everything. Or when babies are born with a cleft, their structural differences allow them to produce sounds that can't actually be produced by or are produced with difficulty by people who don't have clefts. So they might be sort of rustling sounds coming out of their nose. That kind of sound is definitely worth looking into a little bit further as well. And then the last one is if they're not making any sounds at all, or they're not sort of trying to copy any of the things that you're saying. Okay. And then the last slide is the same slide that I've had in the first two sessions about general services and support. So you've got your hospital-based clinics. So if you notice any of the concerns on the previous slide, if you have a hospital-based appointment coming up, you can bring them along to that appointment, and then your clinicians will be able to advise what might be the best next steps in relation to that. And then, of course, there's the private clinics that are available, and you can find them through Speech Pathology Australia. Online resources, we've got this series through Craniofacial Australia and some accompanying written information that will be available in the coming months as well. And then our wonderful family support groups around the country. Okay. I haven't seen any questions come up in the chat, but do pop them in there if you have them. You can find me at info@proteotherapy.com.au. That's the email address. If you address any queries or concerns, I'm happy to answer any brief questions over email. And please do complete the feedback survey linked through this QR code. Even if you're watching this as a recording, the survey will be open and available. And I really appreciate your feedback, and it helps us know what is needed and wanted as well. And many thanks again, to echo what Christina said at the start, to the PKF Adelaide Foundation and also Craniofacial Australia for putting this together and doing all the back end work to have it available and accessible to everybody. Okay, I can see a question. For speech therapists wanting to learn more on how to better support children post cleft surgery, do you recommend any specific trainings? Yeah, great one. There is a module on Speech Pathology Australia on cleft palate speech generally. I haven't checked more recently if it's still available, but that may have a more broad information. I don't know of any other specific trainings, existing trainings here that are available. I do and have done a lot of supervision individually to talk about specific clients, but I don't know of anything that's broadly available at the moment to provide specific training on how to support children after they've had their surgery. But if that's an area of interest, that's something I can look into to developing and putting together. Okay. Another question. Great. Great to see them coming in. Just wondering if the baby gets more difficulties in speech when growing up in a bilingual environment. Yeah, great question. So there's I can answer that question just about bilingualism in general. So there's some evidence that tells us that children who are born up in bilingual environments may take a little bit longer to, or may take a little bit more time to have the same vocabulary in both languages, but we can count the words they have in both languages as their words that they are using if they're different words. I'm hoping that makes sense. So they might be a little bit slower in, say they're learning English and Mandarin. They might have less words in English and less words in Mandarin than a child who is only developing in English, but their total across the two languages might be comparable. So in terms of speech, though, so you've mentioned difficulties in speech, there shouldn't be any specific difficulties in speech just because they're growing up in a bilingual environment. If they may be exposed to a broader range of different sounds, if the two languages have different sound inventories, but that shouldn't lend itself to any more difficulties in development. I hope that answers your question, Vivian. Next question is, how much cleft-specific speech pathology is normal for public cleft teams to offer? Oh, sorry. How much cleft-specific speech pathology is normal for public cleft teams to offer for children post-surgery? Oh, good question. And it really varies. It really varies from center to center and probably even within states and territories, it would be different. So how much therapy you're offered from a public cleft team is going to be different across states. But it's not going to be, I think largely if a lot of therapy is needed, it might not be able to be provided exclusively by the public center. So you might be more likely to have regular checkups across bigger time gaps to see how progress is going rather than that regular therapy after surgery. Okay, for speech pathologists, and if there are any follow-up questions to what I'm asking, do just pop them. I'm just going to scroll down and I'll get to them as well as I get down. For speech pathologists in the community who get clients who have VPI speech characteristics and query what's happening or something structural, is an ENT referral the next step to go for speech therapists not experienced in this area? Yeah, great question. If you're not sure, I would potentially first either have supervision or refer to a speech pathologist, just because there's a bit more probing, a speech pathologist who's a bit more experienced in the area, because there's a bit more probing that can be done. And then that's the cleft specific speech therapist might be able to actually work out what's happening, and then they can decide where a referral, what appropriate referral would be. So it might be to directly into a tertiary cleft center, or it might be to an ENT for further exploration. So I definitely speak to a speech therapist who specializes in this area first. But if there's a weight or anything like that, an ENT referral would definitely be appropriate as well. Thanks, Wendy. Oh, what's the average price for a speech? We've been asked to pay $550 for the first visit. I'm presuming that's a private therapist as well. So because it's a private, a lot of the services you're accessing may be private. The prices are going to really vary, and the range is large, I think, depending on where you're going and depending on what service is included in that initial assessment as well. So typically initial assessments are more expensive because they include assessment session where you're physically in the room and a report that comes with that that will summarize everything that was happened in that assessment and the results from your assessment. So that's why there is a higher price point. And it's really hard for me to comment on exact amounts because it's just so varied. But 550 for the first visit isn't a super surprising amount for me. I think it may be on the slightly higher end. So if that's you might be able to look around a little bit, but it's also about what you want from the service and what you think you might be getting, and for you to feel comfortable with the person you're seeing and for you to trust what they're telling you as well. Leaving to attend a meeting, no worries. Okay, I think I've reached the end of the questions. But I'm very happy to be emailed as well if there are any you know, other follow-up questions that you think of. Do send me an email. Oh, I've just seen one more question. I've been attending a Hannon It Takes Two speech education class referred to by my team, and it's very helpful so far. What cleft specific issues should I be aware of? Joanne, I'm just wondering if you're a parent or a speech therapist. Parent, okay. So some of the things I've talked about today might be things that you've already heard in this Hannon class. That's a great program to be doing. What cleft specific things should you be aware of are the things that I was talking about today in relation to the types of sounds that you're modeling. So really focusing on what types of sounds you want to be encouraging. So discouraging, ignoring anything that's coming out of the nose or anything that's coming down from back here, modeling those sounds that are coming from the front of the mouth. So let me just find the slide, this one. So these sounds here. And I'll put all of this information in that written information online, but that won't be available immediately. But we're thinking about these front sounds, so p, t, s, b, f, sh. So when you're thinking about the words that you might be wanting to encouraging your child to be saying and the words that you're using, trying to focus on these sounds. Obviously, not going to be possible all the time, but when you're really doing that focus time, focusing and thinking overtly and really intently about your language communication and modeling, be thinking about these sounds. That's all really in relation to things that are specific to cleft at this stage. Great. I'm glad that's helpful. For an early career speech pathologist who's interested in learning more about cleft management and working in this more specialized area, what pathways would you suggest? Yeah, thanks, Jess. That's a really great question and perhaps a bigger discussion. And it would depend on where you're working, I suppose. But coming to things like this is helpful to learn. And also, if it's possible to build up a caseload where you're starting to see children who have clefts and really putting the time into reading and learning about that aspect. But I'm happy to have more of a chat to you, Jess, over email if you'd like to send me an email as well. Okay, great. I'm loving all these questions. It's nice to have a little bit of feedback and interaction, so thank you. Okay, I think we are done. And I can see Christina's popped up again.
Yeah, I was about to say that was an amazing session. It was great to see everyone engaging and with their questions and from all different perspectives as well. So thank you, everybody. So our last session will be held on Wednesday, the 19th of March, where Dr. Boyce will be covering strategies to support speech in children born with cleft lip and palate beyond the first year. So we hope you can join us then. And if not, thank you ever so much for attending tonight. And for joining us and for your amazing questions.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely night. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.